Hi, welcome back to Normandy and D-Day live from We Love Normandy with me, Patrick Hillier. Today we are looking at the Normandy Hedgerow countryside, the bocage normand, and I'm currently just on my daily dog walk. There they are, George and Ringo, and we're currently walking down a sunken lane between two very typical Normandy fields. This one currently has a herd of very sleepy cows in it with some calves, and on the other side there's an orchard. And just a mile or two down this road here is the village of Pont Brocard, which was the scene of a skirmish between Combat and Command B of the 2nd US Armoured Division and Panzer Grenadiers of the Panzer Lehr Division. Panzer Lehr, the most highly trained and well equipped armoured units in the German army. And this sunken lane that we're in is typical of the small tracks that join the network of tiny fields here in Lower Normandy. They say that you can estimate the age of one of these tracks by how deep it is. And this one, as you can probably see, is at least 6 foot, maybe 10 foot deep in places. And so it's been here for centuries. Probably from before the medieval period, possibly these fields laid out in the time of Charlemagne, maybe even in the Roman period. So it's been here pretty much forever. And this is the terrain that really hampered the US Army in the weeks that followed D-Day. In fact, it took 7 weeks to move the front line from the D-Day beaches to the Saint-Lô to Perrier Road, just before the breakout operation Cobra on the 25th of July. And one of the main reasons for the Allies finding it difficult to penetrate this country were these hedgerows, sunken lanes and small fields. French call it the bocage. Actually, in southwest England, they have a similar name for the countryside. They call a hedgerow like this a bosky hedge. Presumably the words have the same origin. And here we're going to see an example of one of those hedgerows in cross section. So this is one of the boundaries to this field, which is actually an orchard. And here we've recently had some earth moving equipment come through. They had to cut a hole through the hedgerow in order to replant this orchard. And here you can see a cross section of the Normandy hedgerow. As you can see, it's probably at this point about 7 feet high. And if I pace it out from one end of the base to the other, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 yards or so wide. So 7 feet by 12 feet, it's a huge earth structure. And this was the barrier, this was the obstacle that the Allied tanks found or the Allied tankers found so difficult to penetrate. And so without tank support, the Allied infantry were languishing, if you like, bogged down in the bocage. Now they did have a couple of methods for trying to break through these hedgerows, these banks. One was by ramming the banks with using tanks with hollow rods to create holes in the banks, and then the engineers would place explosives in the holes. So they tried explosives, they tried bulldozer tanks, which were not particularly effective at getting the armoured support from field to field through these impenetrable hedgerows. And word was put about amongst the armoured companies that the High Command were looking for a solution, looking for a way to fix the problem of getting the Sherman tanks, the Stuart tanks, through the Normandy hedgerows. And one particularly smart young sergeant, a guy called Curtis Cullen, after discussing the problem with his platoon, came up with the idea of welding steel blades onto the front of the tanks to create effectively a cutting blade that would allow the tanks to ram these earthen banks and smash their way through. The tank accelerated towards possibly one of the weaker points in the hedgerow and successfully managed to break its way through that earthen bank. Effectively, Cullen had proved that the idea would work. Well, the demonstration went up the line of, or the chain of command, right the way to General Omar Bradley, who by this stage was the commander of all the US forces in Lower Normandy. And when he saw the demonstration of Cullen's hedge cutter tank, or Rhino tank as they were calling it by then, he ordered the mass production of the Rhino blades to be fitted on the majority of the tanks. So Cullen's hedge cutter tank, or Rhino tank, was replicated hundreds or thousands of times, and the device was used during the breakout operation Cobra on the 25th of July, an event that really allowed the American First and Third Armies to pour into the French mainland, into Brittany, hooking round and cutting off the German troops at the Falaise Gap, and then ultimately progressed through the liberation of Paris, the liberation of the Low Countries, and ultimately the defeat of Germany. So Curtis Cullen went down in history as the originator or the inventor of the Rhino tank, the hedge cutter tank. A 29-year-old sergeant from New Jersey, awarded the US Order of Merit for his idea. But ironically, it was a private in Cullen's platoon that actually came up with the idea. Private Roberts, who was the son, I think, of a farmer from the Midwest, and he'd actually came up with the idea. I think most of his buddies probably laughed when he said that you should put a blade on the front of a tank and cut your way through the hedgerow. But Cullen had the good sense to take the idea and run with it. And it's Cullen, Curtis Cullen, that we remember as the originator of the Rhino tank. Come on, George. Allez.